Hey, Master of Speed, it's Terramaster back with Drake for another list. You may be like, you guys, what? You already did a list. No, Drake, how's this one different?
This one only has 5 cards on it, but more importantly, this one is a sideboard top 5 list.
Right. Yeah, so we're giving you the top 5 side deck cards in Speed Duels in early 2023. It is February 2023 as of this recording. So, let's get right into it.
Number 5.
Number 5, we have got Yugioh. This is one of your favorite cards, so I'm going to let you talk about it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite cards in Yu-Gi-Oh history. Currently, it just barely clings on to the list. One of the reasons I'll say right up front that it is so low on the top 5 is because it takes up the limited 1 spot. So it means you're not maining or siding Yugioh or Nightmare Wheel. So it's a pretty steep cost. There are some decks that do want to use this over those cards, like Unions, who can easily special summon monsters and tribute one of them away for a Yugioh and then make their fusion play. They want Yugioh against the trap decks, Crystal Beasts, Volcanics, stuff like that. But there's not a ton of decks where you're actually wanting to tribute away one of your monsters for a Yugioh. Joey doesn't care about that because they can negate traps just with their skill. So I don't think Yugioh's a super widespread. When it does hit the board, it's still a very powerful card.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like you said, it's not great as far as like it's spawned the limited list for a lot of decks to want, but it's still good in some decks to help them beat some matchups, right? So,
Yeah.
like you really want it against Crystal Beasts. You know, the example you gave is Unions, right? Unions normally have problems with Crystal Beasts because of Conclave and Raigeki, honestly, right? So you kind of want Yugioh in that deck for that matchup, right? You want it for trap monsters. We watched Toxic Judgment. We watched Unions lose 2 trap monsters, right? And Yugioh was actually one of the game wins for Unions, right? They didn't win the match, but when they summoned Yugioh, they won that game more often than not.
Yeah. The other downside of Yugioh right now is Offerings to the Doomed is seeing a ton of play, probably more than it ever has in Speed Duel. And that's just an easy out to Yugioh. So if you time the Yugioh correctly, time the Yugioh well, or they just don't have removal for it, it's still very powerful. You can still just steal a game with it. But keep in mind, there are outs to your Yugioh.
Yeah, it's not just offerings. A top meta deck, Joey Beatdown, also plays Shrink a lot now. So, Yugioh running over any monster above 1200. If there's a Shrink back there, it's not happening. So, yeah, it's another thing to worry about. But all right, I think we're ready to move on to number 4. Number 4. Number 4 is Night Beam. My favorite word, beam. This is Night Beam. Now, why is Night Beam here? Primary reason that I would and do side Night Beam is for additional back row hate. So if you're playing an aggro deck, like Cyber Angel, it's the best example right now. Your deck already has 3 pieces of back row hate, but sometimes if your opponent is consistently setting 2 or 3 back row on their first turn, you want more available in your deck. So you side into either 1 or 2 Night Beams extra additionally to have 4, maybe 5, probably 5 pieces of back row hate in your main deck rather than just the 3. And you're not doing that to see all 5, right? You're doing it so you see like 2, right? Early enough. And 1 maybe later if the game drags on. So you can maybe hit a late game Wall of D or something.
Yeah, that mostly covers it. Cyber Angels especially like this card because they're going to want more back row removal if they face something like Joey or Crystal Beast. But also, it's a spell. If they open it, they can just pitch it for their skill and search any combo piece they need. It has added value there. But there are some other decks, some other aggressive decks that do consider Night Beam. The downside of Night Beam is that it's not chainable on your opponent's turn. It is just a normal spell. So it's not as good against something like Blaze Accelerator, for example, or a Zoma. You can hit it preemptively with a Zoma, but you're not gonna hit it in the battle phase or anything like that, or end phase.
Yeah.
So they both have their uses, but Night Beam is nice, as you said, as additional back row removal.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's it. We both made our points. Let's go on.
Number 3.
So for number 3, we have Lost Wind. And this one's actually really interesting because it didn't see a ton of play until more recently. But people have sort of been figuring out it's actually pretty good against Cyber Angels. So a lot of people's answer to Cyber Angels is those counterplay things where before your opponent goes off at all, you do something preventative, like Mind Crush or Curse Seal. And while those totally work in that situation where you got to set those before your Cyber Angel opponent went off, Lost Wind can do that because when they special the Azana, you can say, I'm going to Lost Wind that so that you don't get a ritual spell from deck or grave.
Edatin, yeah.
Yep, sorry, Edatin. But yeah, it can cut off their combo right there, and they could just be sitting on a 2000 defense Edatin that you can get over with a Jiragumo or whatever it is your deck is running that has, over 2000.
Even Steamroid.
Sure, even a Steamroid or a Cyber Dragon or the list goes on.
Yeah.
2000 is a number that can be beaten over.
Yeah.
But stopping their combo there is usually pretty major, especially if you want to protect your back row. You're not letting them get to the Azana play.
Right.
So they're not getting rid of your back row.
And sometimes if you stop that first ritual spell from being recycled or replaced, right, if they search it from the deck, they may not have another one immediately, right? Like on the next turn, even they might not have another one unless they happen to draw like an extra Sonic Bird or something. They might have to wait 2, maybe 3 turns to activate the ritual spell again. And even if they can protect their Edatin once, because 2000 defense, they can protect it once. That I think might give you enough time. If it takes them 2 turns, that probably gives you enough time to clear their board and do a lot of damage and sometimes just win.
Right. Sometimes you will just win in that time period.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'll just be able to draw more back row to stay alive or more monsters to apply pressure.
Yeah.
Getting rid of their machining to rituals from grave is helpful.
Yes.
At the very least, it is helping your strategy every time you make them activate one.
Yeah.
Sure. The other thing about Lost Wind, because it's not as powerful as a preventative card as like Curse Seal and Mind Crush could be, because Curse Seal and Mind Crush can both say, hey, you're not getting any rituals out. And in the case of Curse Seal, you're not getting any rituals out this entire game, which is obviously pretty impactful. But what's nice about Lost Wind over those cards is you could draw a Lost Wind later in the game and it still has an effect. Damage step it on their special summoned monster. Izana cannot trigger in damage step. That monster that you targeted's effects are permanently negated and its attack is permanently halved.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's
I think we've talked about this in the last video where
shrink.
Cards that can be used after the board is established are generally more valuable than cards that have to be used preemptively, even if those preemptive cards are more impactful when they work.
Right. Yeah, and it's Lost Wind, the best part about it is to build on that point is that it's flexible, right? We've been talking about both ways, right? If you stop the combo, you're using it preventatively. It's not as good as Mind Crush or Curse Seal, but it's still pretty good preventatively, And the biggest benefit it has over Mind Crush and Curse Seal, you don't need to have any cards in hand.
That's also true. That is a good point.
Yeah.
And then it can be used against other matchups as well. You can Lost Win against Unions. It's very good there. You can even get its recursion effect sometimes there when they make a fusion.
That's true.
Bring it back from grave. That's good value.
Yep.
It can be really, really impactful against something like Relinquished.
Yeah.
Just attacking into it when it has materials and then something equipped to it.
Yeah.
And then you Lost Wind it in damage step, and they're just taking the full blunt of your attack. That can be huge as well.
Right. Xyz Monster Relinquished has
Yeah.
materials now.
Materials.
All right, I think that's a sign we've done enough talking about Lost Wind. Let's
pretty good
go
card.
on. Yeah, let's go on. Number 2. All right, yeah. So the second best, I guess, is how we're defining it. The second most played, whatever way you want to think about it. Side deck card is Offerings to the Doomed. Now this, a lot of players will main it. We talked about Joey is maining it, but I think I have also seen this in the side deck a lot. And it's not just exclusively a side deck card sometimes. So like I have seen deck lists where, and this is the advantage of being a host of a lot of tournaments, I get to see a lot of deck lists. I've seen deck lists where people will have like 1 or 2 offerings in the main and then have 1 or 2 in the side, right? So you're playing 3 total, but you're siding in either the second, third, or the third copy in case you have a matchup where like, oh yeah, Offerings is really good against Banisher, right? So I'm going to put in all 3 of my Offerings into my main deck, right? That way, if it's a matchup where it's not good, like CAs, for example, and you're not on Banisher, so for that combo, you're like, it's easy to take out 1 or 2 Offerings than it is to take out 3. So
That's fair.
yeah, so like even when it's main decked, sometimes it's also side decked. And when it's not main decked, it's definitely, I've seen it in side deck. Like even Cyber Angels can play it, and then I want you to talk about this. Like it's not always incorrect to do that.
Yeah, the thing about Offerings is you can certainly main 3, but then you do have the slight issue of now you have 3 more cards that you need to side out against Cyber Angels, so maybe you should only main 1 or 2. That's debatable. This card actually almost made our top 10 main deck card video, but we decided the other ones were a little bit better, keeping in mind that Cyber Angels are in the format, and this card doesn't do a lot against them. It's probably the worst card in your deck against them, unless you're maining Dust Tornado. But yeah, you could totally side this as a Cyber Angel player, because from my experience at least, the Joey deck can beat you, and it usually requires them opening like Banisher plus back row, and this just says, okay, your Banisher's gone. Let me just go off. I don't want you banishing my Machine Angel Rituals or my Idotins and Bentens so that I can't use my Azana's Shuffle effect. So that's one way to deal with it. So if you don't want to go more Night Beams, you're like, I think I'm fine with 3 Cosmics in the main, you could say, okay, instead I'm going to do Offerings instead of Night Beams.
I will mention one more thing. If you remember our number 1 card on the top 10 main deck staples, that was Zoma. You know, Offerings is really good against Zoma.
Yep.
Because your opponent, you will attack, right? Your opponent activates Zoma, it puts it out in defense, and right as it resolves, you slap down that Offerings, that Zoma is gone, and you get to replay your attack. And if that was the lethal attack, well, good job. You won the game that you could have lost if that Zoma would have actually stayed on the field. So that's like an old interaction, right? Like Zoma Offerings chained to it is something we used to see a lot, like a long time ago. But we still won't see it as much. But with Zoma being played so much, as in like picked off the Limit 1 list so much, Offerings is also really good to have, just to stop that one of from turning around the entire game for no reason, right?
Yeah, and this card, I understand why it's so popular. If you draw Cyber Dragon, Offerings, and a monster, and you are playing Joey Beatdown, you're probably winning that game. Because you're probably just going Special Summon Cyber Dragon, Normal Summon your monster, Declare Attack, Offerings their monster, and now you have usually around 4,000 damage in that one battle phase in your opening hand at that.
Right, and they can't trap anymore, right? Because it's battle phase. They thought maybe they thought they were safe and didn't activate their Zoma, right, or whatever trap that they could have done in the main phase. So you've got him at that point.
Yep.
All right, I think it's time for the number one side deck card.
Number 1.
All right, for number 1, we put Mind Crush. Even though we love praising cards that aren't these preventative cards, this is probably the most powerful one. All you need is a card in hand to activate it. You don't need a spell specifically. And then also there's times where you rather have a Mind Crush than a Curse Seal. Because if they, for instance, use Cosmic Cyclone on your Curse Seal, you probably just let that resolve. But if they use it on your Mind Crush, you have the opportunity to call with it. Even if it's a blind call. So there are times where making a blind call is correct.
Yes.
I'll just give one example. It could be like, if they do an Ida-10 boost here, I lose. So you call Ida-10 so they can't do an Ida-10 boost. You might completely stop their ritual summon altogether. Or you might call it wrong, discard the card in hand, lose the game anyway. But that's something to consider is, am I going to lose this game if I call wrong? And am I going to also lose this game if I don't make a call?
Yeah.
So we like to sort of say like, oh, you shouldn't be blind calling, but you have to keep in mind sometimes you should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. When things go right with this card, so when they're not Cosmicing it or Night Beaming it or anything like that, this is the best choke point card because pretty much every deck can sideboard this because they don't need to discard a spell. They just need to keep one card in their hand, and opponent summons whatever, Sunju, Sonic Bird, whatever, and then they go to activate Machine Ninja Ritual, and you call the card you know is in their hand. You can basically end their turn right there a lot of the time. And that's huge against Cyber Angels because they're going to end their turn with just maybe just a Senju or a Sonic Bird on board, pass. You're going to gladly and easily attack over that, and then now they are immediately in a position where they need to top deck another, whether it's a ritual monster or a ritual spell or what. They need to top deck like the exact card they need to get back in that game.
Yeah.
So very strong against that deck. And then against some other decks, you can call Golden Ladybug when you know they have that in their hand. You can call Blaze Accelerator when you know they have that in their hand. Those are probably the two decks I would mainly side it against. Oh, and also against Relinquished as well.
Yes.
Because if they activate their ritual spell, well, they're obviously summoning Relinquished. So you can just say, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to call Relinquished. And they're like, well, that was my turn.
Yeah. Well, the Relinquish one is much better than Cyber Angels because it's the ritual spell specifically says summon Relinquished, right? So if you discard Relinquish, that spell is guaranteed to just fizzle. And you've essentially not only, you said, yeah, that's their turn, but that might also just be their game, right?
Exactly, because it's you're getting rid of their Relinquished, you're getting rid of their ritual spell that would summon their next Relinquished. So they're down 2 cards. And they may have ended on a blank field.
Yeah.
So if you're not killing them there, you may just very well be killing them on the next turn. So it's kind of like the Cyber Angel thing, except it's more reliable.
Right. Yep. And yeah, the Volcanic thing is very nice. Against Volcanics, it's good. Again, it's flexible in that matchup, where it's good early and late, because It's good if you want to hit a Blaze Accelerator on turn 2, right? If their first plays Normal Summon Rocket, Surge Blaze, and you're like, nope, you can do that. And if you draw it way later, when they have 2 or maybe sometimes 3 Ladybug in hand, you're like, okay, I'm just going to call it and draw phase so you don't gain the life points this turn, and you just lost 3 cards from your hand. Sometimes their entire hand is like 4 cards at that point, right? So you're like, okay, I just took off 75% of your hand and your life point fuel at the same time. That's a game-winning play late game against Volcanics.
Yep.
All right. Mind Crush is, I think, in most side decks that aren't Cyber Angels, obviously, but most other decks are side decking not 1 but 2 Mind Crush essentially in most tournaments. So it's definitely one of the best side deck cards. Just not one of, the best, the most played at least side deck card in Speed Duels. Now whether or not it's the best is obviously subjective. I think it's really good. So yeah, do you have any final thoughts on the top 5 side deck cards?
Yeah, I think Crush is probably the best sideboard card because it can be used against the best deck as well as other decks. But yeah, I think a lot of people maybe are overlooking Lost Wind right now. I would take another look at that card for a sideboard option.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think Lost Wind is something that people lost track of how good it was for a while there, but I could definitely see it making a comeback ever since us Cyber Angel players started citing it in for each other. So yeah, and in doing so, we kind of realize how good it is against that deck. So hopefully the influence spreads and we can see a little more of Izana and Edatin wins getting lost. But that's getting lost. All right. That's all we got for you today. We've already talked long enough. Thanks as always for watching. Until next time, Terramaster and Drake, we're out.